So today, we're gonna find out how Far Cry runs on my old rig. Now, I've been playing about 12 hours, having great fun, but it's time to figure it out once and for all if you can actually stick a brand new video card in a 7-year-old PC and then still be able to run it right. So to summarize, I'm running an i7 4790K processor at stock levels, 16 gigs of 1866 megahertz RAM. We have an SSD for the Windows 10 install and an SSD for the game install. The SSD for the Windows install is a Samsung Pro, and the game install is a Samsung Evo 1TB. The video card, 6800 RX. We're gonna see how well that does. So I used the in-game benchmark to get the most consistent results, and I used the binned settings, so I didn't change anything else but going from low to medium to high to ultra, and then finally hitting ultra with ray tracing on to see how good or how bad my old rig handles that stuff. So in the top left hand corner you will see the numbers during each run. So first you'll see the GPU with the temp, load and VRAM usage, then my processor with temp, load and clock speed. The total RAM usage is next, and lastly the FPS with the current, average and 1% low. So this is the low setting right here. We're starting out strong pretty much with 100 FPS, but as soon as the detail starts coming in, we drop down into the 90s with occasional dips further down into the 60s. One thing that pretty much instantly stood out was the 1% low. My processor is taxed way higher than the card, something that will continue throughout testing. I was actually pretty surprised at the way the game looks at this setting. A lot of vegetation, however, does pop up at close distances, but overall it's not really a bad looking game. The 1% low on this run was 35 FPS. Far Cry actually has their own counter in-game which produces a graph, so you can see where the dips occur. But overall it runs a solid and an average FPS of 91. So on medium we very briefly hit 100 FPS early on in the run, but in the city this dips down again to the 80s with some dips, one of which is 59 FPS. It's very clear from this point on that my rig does not like that portion of the benchmark very much.
Attention inhabitants of Concepcion. This is a reminder that curfew will be in effect tonight. It is strongly urged that you respect these safety measures established by your government.
The vegetation detail now kind of eases in as opposed to just popping in, which is a much nicer look. The 1% low on this run was 32 FPS, and the graph shows the same FPS dips at 5 and 13 seconds. It still manages to run an average of 81 FPS, which is pretty good. So on the high setting, we start seeing FPS dips into the 50s pretty much out of the gate on this setting. It was the first time I noticed the slowdowns on screen inside the city, but overall it still manages to run in the solid 70s throughout.
Attention inhabitants of Concepcion. This is a reminder that curfew will be in effect tonight. It is strongly urged that
This is probably the first setting that I would consider acceptable. The vegetation is now present as the camera pans around the homes. There's also added detail in the distance, such as the buoys and the cargo ship, which makes the world just a little bit more alive. The 1% low ends up at 28 FPS for the run, 74 FPS average, so there isn't a huge penalty between medium and high settings. So this is the ultra setting, also the setting I play my game on personally. It runs very similar to high, and I feel you'd be hard pressed to find a difference between the two. Strangely enough, the 1% low will end up at 31 FPS for this run, which is better than on high, but the average is down to 72 FPS.
This is a reminder that curfew will be in effect tonight. It is strongly urged that you respect this safety measure established by your government.
So this last run is an ultra with the ray tracing enabled. So no more 100% FPS peak at the beginning. It taxes the system pretty severely for not a very noticeable change in graphics. Now the worst part in this one is that there was a major FPS dip which brought down the 1% low to 1 FPS. That kind of behavior is not desirable. Strangely, this dip occurred at 19 seconds in, unlike the other two dips at 5 and 13, which are still here as well. I reran this benchmark and every time it showed back up. Ray tracing had a huge impact on the performance on my personal PC. But wait, there is more. So I actually ran this test again and capped the system to 60 FPS. This dropped the 1% low to 26 FPS, and the graph shows that the dip at 19 seconds was eliminated. Another big change was the processor temperature. The processor was actually 10 to 15 degrees cooler than running the other benchmarks where I had uncapped FPS. I still run a stock cooler that has been in the same place since 2014. So yes, I am 100% needing to repaste that, put a bigger cooler on it. But PC is so old at this stage that I'm like, you know what? I'm not touching it. I want to build a new rig and then I'll start working on this one. Because if it works now and I start mess with it and it doesn't work after, I'd be pissed at myself for touching it. So moving on, I also took some screenshots at every detail from low to medium, high, ultra, and ultra with ray tracing. It does seem ray tracing produces just a little bit of a deeper image, but not enough for me to feel sorry about myself for running lowly ultra. The money setting would really be high as it produces a nice image. Medium and low doesn't really do the game justice knowing what it can look like. So conclusion, it is 100% worth it putting a newer video card in an older PC, and especially nowadays, because finding a video card is like the hardest thing. All the other components, some of them are pretty hard too, depending on what processor you want and stuff like that, but graphics cards, they're the worst right now. So if you get your hands on one, of course you want to put it in your old PC, get some extra gaming out of it, maybe a new lease on life, because for me, the changeover from going from my R9 390 to the 6800, mind-blowing, because when I render a video, it now takes minutes. It used to take the exact length of the video, or sometimes even longer. Now it's like 1/3 of the length of the video. So if I render a 10-minute video, it takes about 3 to 4 minutes, which is absolutely great. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave me a comment down below. And if you enjoyed this content, please consider subscribing, because we need to get to 1,000 somehow. And, you know, we're lacking. I think we're 150 at this stage. It is what it is. Still, I enjoy doing this stuff and enjoy doing gaming as opposed to my car content from time to time to mix it up. And gaming makes me happy, you know. 12 hours I put in Far Cry in the span of a few days, like in the first week. And that, you know, a lot of time in the seat playing a video game that, it's a franchise that I freaking love. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys on the flip side. And don't forget, #game for the sake of gaming. Take care.